I learned the weight of silence before I learned the weight of steel. In the stillness of dawn, when crows stitched the sky with black thread and the well bucket creaked like an old bone, I wrapped my breasts. With cloth cut my hair with my father's whetstone and swore that my life would be sharper than the blade I hid beneath my robe. I was born in a house that measured seasons by the sound of rain on cedar. My mother spun thread. My father oiled swords for men who wore their names on their hips. He was not a hero, only a retainer paid in rice and patience, but he treated every blade like a vow. When I was 9, he let me hold one, a plain katana without ornament. "Steel remembers," he said. "What it has cut, what it has spared." After he died from a fever, the swords stopped coming. Our gate sagged. The garden went to crabgrass. Men passing the road would say, "That was the house of the polisher," as if a life could be emptied with a tense change. I listened from behind the shji and felt my ribs count themselves. I learned to move soundlessly, the way my mother moved when grief pressed a hand over her mouth. At night, I practiced with a broom handle in the narrow corridor, tracing the curve my father had taught me: lift, breathe, descend. I discovered that the body keeps secrets if you ask it kindly. There was an old man who slept under the shrine ginkgo. No one knew whether he had been a soldier or a bandit. He watched me one morning as I practiced, the broom handle whispering through mist. When I stopped, he said, "You hold a stick like you've been promised something." He lifted a hand that trembled with age and showed me how to anchor my feet. "A sword is not a wish," he said. "It is a decision." He taught me the first 5 cuts the way fishermen teach water, by standing in it. He corrected my elbows with 2 fingers and used words that made more sense to my muscles than to my mind. "Put your breath in the hilt. Open the door behind your shoulder. Let the blade climb the enemy's mistake." I paid him with rice balls and silence. He paid me with a map of movement, a grammar of steel etched into the tendons. When the levy came for Ashiguru, the recruiting officer laughed at my name written in a masculine hand and said, "You are small like a sparrow." I said, "Sparrows survive winters." He shrugged, looking for coin in my sleeves. I had none, but a neighbor whose son had run away paid for my sake, thinking I was his son returned under a different name. I bowed so low my forehead touched the dust, and my hair, already cut to the stubborn length of truth, fell forward like a curtain between who I had been and who I chose to be. The night before I left, my mother burned a lock of my childhood hair and prayed to the household gods with a face as blank as unfrozen water. She didn't ask me not to go. She only placed my father's whetstone in my palm. "Your father stood in rain to keep his word to men who forgot his name," she said. "If you must stand, stand for your own name." It was the only blessing I ever received. I left before dawn, when even the dogs were still translating dreams into growls. The road unrolled like a spine, each village another vertebra, each milestone a tooth. I walked it with the broom handle replaced by a real blade wrapped in cloth. It had no family crest, no lacquered scabbard, only the honesty of use. When the sun rose, I felt its warmth on the back of my neck, and imagined a hand there, steadying me forward. "Steel remembers," my father had said. The road remembers too. It remembers the feet that choose it. In the muster yard, men became units the way rice becomes porridge. By heat, by pressure, by losing individual shape. We were rank and file, sandals and sweat, straw armor that itched where it protected and scratched where it failed. They called me Saburo because the clerk, bored, wrote the third son on every third line. I nodded. Names can be borrowed. Resolve cannot. Training began with humiliation disguised as discipline. We ran until the earth tasted like iron in our mouths, then drilled until our arms had the memory of reeds in a storm. The sergeant slapped shoulders, adjusted stances with a kick. "Again," they said, as if the word were a prayer. By the 7th day, my palms had opened in 2 raw mouths. I closed them with salt and will. I learned how to carry my sword so it did not sing my secrets. I bound my chest with cloth pulled tight enough to turn breath into a ration. I pissed at night when the others slept and washed in the shallows with my back to the moon. When the men spoke of women, they spoke of markets and mothers, not of the quiet thread that links life to purpose. In their laughter, I hid like a pin in a sleeve. There was one who noticed, or thought he did. His name was Tominari, a farmer drafted from a valley where the wind combed wheat with both hands. He watched how I wrapped my leggings, how I avoided the smoke that made my eyes water, how my hands were careful with knots. One evening he said, "You hold your blade as if it were a cup of tea." I smiled without showing teeth. "Then I must be careful not to spill," I replied. After that, he watched me the way a hawk watches a shape moving under grass, curious, not yet certain. On our first march, we followed the river like a thought, bending where it bent, widening our line where it widened. The commander strode ahead on a horse whose hooves wrote arguments with the road. We were told we would secure a bridge, a village, a reputation. I tasted the word secure in my mouth. It felt like a closed fist. Battle, when it came, did not announce itself with drums or banners. It rose from ditches and bamboo thickets like men waking in a bad mood. The first arrow sounded like a sparrow astonishing itself. The second sounded like arithmetic. Then the air filled with numbers. I moved as the old man had taught me, feet seeking the ground's permission, blade climbing mistakes. A man in a blue sash lunged with bad intentions and worse footwork. I sidestepped, let his weight betray him, and cut across his resolve. Blood is warm and slick, nothing like in stories. It asks questions of your grip. We held the bridge not by glory but by inches. When the enemy pushed, we became a wall of breaths counted to the same beat. I found myself near Tominari when a spearhead sang for his ribs. Without thinking, I stepped inside its song and cut the singer's throat. Tominari looked at me with a gratitude that felt like the first sunlight after a week of rain. "You drink your tea very hot," he said, voice shaking. I said nothing. The dead do not like chatter. By dusk, the river had swallowed enough of both sides to call itself even. We stacked bodies into the argument of a pyre and warmed our hands at the compromise. The commander announced we were victorious, which meant we were alive and they were less so. Men cheered because cheering is easier than thinking. Tominari offered me his share of roasted millet. "You're not like the others," he said. I looked at the fire until it was the only color in the world. "No," I answered. "I am my mother's child." The next morning I woke with the knowledge that death had brushed past me on its way to someone else. I tightened my bindings and tied my hair shorter. Names could be borrowed, uniforms shared. But the blade at my side had learned the shape of my hand. That, at least, was mine. Reputation grows like mold quietly. In damp places men pretend not to see. By the third campaign, the sergeants sent me to the front sightlines, where the ground spoke in small elevations and the bamboos showed the wind's handwriting. My cuts were clean, my timing slightly ahead of the drum. "Saburo sees too much," one said half-jokingly. "We will promote him to see even more. Rank tastes like old wood. It splinters the tongue and does not nourish." The general arrived not long after. He entered camp with a quiet that made noise look cheap. His armor was lacquered black, unadorned except for a cord the color of a winter plum. His face belonged to a cliff. Waves had tried it for years and failed. Men stiffened around him the way grass stiffens before frost. He was a man whose words were furniture heavy, few, meant to last. Rumors like birds landed where crumbs lay. Someone had told him of a spare-built ashigaru whose balance suggested training uncommon to his birth. He watched the drills, his gaze moving like a beam searching for rot. When my turn came to demonstrate the kata before the unit, he raised one eyebrow by the width of a rice grain. "Who taught you to place your left foot so?" he asked. "My father." I lied, because truth can be an arrow you knock only once. He nodded, as if I had placed a stone properly in a garden he was composing. That night, Tominari shared with me an old pear and a new worry. "You move like my aunt when she needs dough," he said, and his eyes meant kindness and danger together. I took the pear and let the sweetness fill the corners of my mouth. "Perhaps your aunt is a better fighter than your uncle," I said. He laughed, then sobered. "If you are what I think you are, then nothing here is safe." He whispered the last word, and it hung like an unstruck bell. I slept badly, the sky too close. A dog barked at its dream. In the morning, the general summoned me with a messenger whose sandals had seen better orders. I stepped into his tent, where maps lay like unfolded regrets. He didn't look up at first. "Tell me your name," he said. "Saburo," I answered. He placed a pebble on a river drawn in ink. "Names interest me less than capacity," he said. "You will lead a flank tomorrow. If we fail, it will be because you mistook courage for competence." He finally met my eyes, and in them I saw the precise temperature at which metal forgets its former shape. I bowed because a bow can mean both obedience and the readiness to rise. Tomonari found me later, his face a study in conflict. "I cannot keep your secret if keeping it breaks the men," he said. "If you must tell it," I replied. "Tell it as if it were yours." He looked at me as if I had handed him a blade with no hilt. The battle that followed was less a clash than a negotiation conducted with sharp tools. Our flank moved through alder and low fog. I counted heartbeats, not enemies, and put my breath in the hilt. When the enemy line finally showed itself, it was not a line but a trembling rope. We cut it where it sagged. Twice I thought of Tomonari's ant kneading dough and understood something about force distributed through the heel. By noon, the field was a manuscript written in red and trampled grass. In the late push, our center faltered, and orders ran like frightened children. The general himself rode into the gap, his sword a sentence that ended what it touched. He saw me redirect a knot of men with a shout timed to the wind's lull. Afterward, he dismounted, handed his horse to a page, and walked to me through a rain of ash. "Competence," he said, as if naming a kind of weather. "Do not mistake it for absolution." 2 days later, a messenger from the capital arrived with papers stiff as propriety. The emperor, it said, would receive the general and his officers to hear of the campaign. I was to attend because the general required an account unembellished by heroics. The ink was dry but felt wet against my nerves. Tomonari gripped my forearm before we set out. "If there is a high place," he said, "somebody will make you stand on it." He looked at me as men look at river crossings. "If you fall," I told him, "I will make the river answer for it." The smile he gave me was brief and complete. "You are the strangest man I have ever met," he said. We both pretended the sentence ended there. On the road to the capital, the general rode at a measured pace, as if time itself were a horse he had trained. When we camped, he sometimes stood alone, hands clasped behind his back, studying the constellations as if their order might be improved. I wondered if he had ever been wrong in a way that cost him sleep. The capital rose from the horizon like a decision made by many hands. Gates, roofs layered like the backs of fish, streets where silk taught the wind to behave. I wrapped my bindings tighter and rehearsed the kata of walking. Steele remembers. Cities too. Ceremony is the art of making breath obey. We washed and dressed under the instructions of men whose job was precision. Our armor got polished until it reflected a version of us that looked more obedient than true. The general inspected each of us and paused when he reached me. "Your harness sits well," he said. Then, softer, "Do not speak unless asked. Do not answer the question not asked." His eyes flicked to my shoulders, then away. That was the first time I felt the thread between us authority, yes, but also the slightest, most dangerous sympathy. The audience hall smelled of sandalwood and paint ground from the backs of beetles. Courtiers moved like lanterns in a slow wind, soft, glowing, tethered. We stood in formation on a floor you felt guilty for standing on. At the far end, the emperor sat with the stillness that makes still water nervous. He was younger than I expected, or perhaps the distance deceived me. Around him, counselors arranged themselves like punctuation. When the general stepped forward, the room leaned in. He spoke about the campaign the way good carpenters speak of joints, plainly with pride that didn't need adjectives. He described the flank, the fog, the rope of an enemy line, and then he did something I did not foresee. He said, "I called upon an Ashigaru named Saburo to lead when leading was the difference between a bend and a break." His voice laid my name on the floor like an offering. A courtier with a fox's smile tilted his fan. "An Ashigaru," he said, the word tasting of small wages. Exceptional tailies are often a sign of disorder. The general didn't bow to the insinuation. "Disorder is when we lie to the emperor," he said. His words sounded like a whetstone. The emperor's gaze moved to me without moving anything else. Step forward, he said, and the command opened in my chest like a door without hinges. I walked to the center of the hall and knelt, the armor creaking its tiny confessions. Behind me, the world was a wall of eyes. Your general speaks of competence, the emperor said. Competence is a narrow bridge over a wide river. I am interested in how you crossed. I told him of fog, of wind, of timing my shout to cut through fear. I kept my voice flat, the way one speaks of rice. He listened. When I finished, he asked no questions. Silence pooled. It was the fox-smiled courtier who disturbed the water. He fluttered his fan lazily. Your Majesty, tales of merit seduce us into forgetting structure. A sparrow who flies above the hawks is still a sparrow. He eye-slanted toward the general. And sometimes hawks mistake clever sparrows for something more. The general's voice was granite. A hawk recognizes a hawk. Then he turned to the emperor. Yet I do not question your Majesty's right to ask for proof that merit is not mischief. Very well, the emperor said, and in those two words lay centuries of practice. A demonstration. They brought practice poles wrapped in cloth, but the general waved them away. Steel is the honest witness, he said. Swords were brought, dull only to the flourish of vanity. We were to touch, to test, not to spill blood on the painted silence. The general gestured to a warrior 2 ranks above me, a hard-faced man whose swagger had the slope of entitlement. Katsutada, he said, show Saburo the courtesy of truth. We bowed. We circled. I placed my breath in the hilt and thought of the old man under the ginkgo. Katsutada slashed with the confidence of proper birth. I let his blade climb my deflection and fed him his own weight. He recovered, smiled with more teeth than sense, and drove a thrust it took me 3 heartbeats to unbuild. The 4th heartbeat was mine. I placed my cut where his thought had not yet reached. His sword jumped like a startled fish. A lacquered fragment flew, clicked against the floor, and died there. A sound passed through the hall. Not quite approval, not yet permission. Katsutada stepped back, red across one knuckle, pride wounded in a place that never scarred right. He bowed stiffly. I bowed easily, because the body knows who is careful. The fox-smiled courtier leaned toward the emperor, but the general spoke first, and his words arrived like winter. No woman can hold a sword, he said, eyes on me. The hall tilted. It seemed for a breath that he was the fox after all, smiling under a different skin. Then he continued, voice deliberate. Or so I have been told every year by men who hold theirs like fans. A pause rippled. Your Majesty, I ask permission to correct a lie. My mouth tasted of iron. The general addressed me without turning. Saburo, he said. Remove your helmet. The world narrowed to the leather knots at my jaw. My hands moved of their own accord. The helmet came free with a small sigh, as if relieved of complicity. Hair too short to be feminine, too soft to be masculine, fell against my temples. The bindings pressed a constellation into my skin. I set the helmet at my knees and lifted my face to the distance where the emperor sat. Silence. Not the painted kind, not the ceremonial kind. The kind that measures change. A pigeon cooed somewhere in the roof. The fox-smiled courtier's fan forgot its motion. The general, still not looking at me, said with that same winter in his tone, Now let us talk about competence. The emperor did not blink. Stand, he said, and I obeyed with knees that remembered battle better than court. Around me, breath collected like dew on a blade. The room had become a weighing scale. Men placed their looks on one pan and on the other lay my name. The fox-smiled courtier recovered his fan and his music. Your Majesty, he said, imposture is wrought. It travels through timber and brings down the house. Today it is a helmet. Tomorrow it is titles. His eyes grazed my chest. The bindings felt suddenly like a crime. The general finally turned, and his gaze was the clean cut through gossip. Deception kept order in the ranks because men would have made a greater disorder of the truth. He said, If you wish to punish, punish me for seeing the plank and letting the bridge stand. But do not pretend the bridge did not hold. The emperor lifted one hand, and words landed. He addressed me. What is your name? Not the borrowed one, Kai, I said. The syllable startled me with its own clarity. Who taught you to hold a sword, Kai? An old man without a name that mattered, I answered. And my father who polished blades but never drew them. And why did you come to war? He asked. Because the world told me I could not, I said. And because I wanted my hands to remember something I had chosen. He leaned fractionally forward, a tide barely noticed until the shore is different. If I permit this, the wall between roles will crack. Men will pour through it with fear, and fear brings knives into meetings where they do not belong. What do you say to that? That walls crack because they are walls, I said before I could polish the thought. Better to build bridges and teach men to walk across. I will teach them. I have already walked. A murmur like the first wind of a storm moved through ranks and robes. The fox-smiled courtier spoke more sharply. Permission is contagion. Next we will have peasants ordering nobles, horses writing poetry. Laughter, thin and eager, made a clean place for him to stand. The general remained a winter tree, bare and exact. He did not speak. Another test, the emperor said. Not of your wrist. Of your restraint. A servant brought a straw target wrapped tight as a body and placed it 3 steps from me. Cut once, he said. No more. Do not move your feet after you begin. He looked at the general. Then we will talk of bridges. I breathed until the room became a pulse. In the corner of my vision, Tominari stood among the lower officers, eyes wide as if he had swallowed the moon. I placed the blade at the imaginary beginning, where thought gathers before it decides to become movement. The old man's voice was in my elbow, my spine, the ball of my foot. Put your breath in the hilt. Open the door behind your shoulder. Let the blade climb the enemy's mistake. I moved. One cut, descending like a truth refused too long. The straw target sighed apart, top sliding from bottom, with the decorum of a bow. I stopped where I had promised to stop. My feet stayed. My breath found me. The emperor watched the severed straw consider itself, then looked at the general. Restraint, he said. And a bridge. He turned to the fox-smiled courtier. Fear is not a policy. Then to me. Kai, I will not rewrite the registers today. Titles are threads in a heavy fabric. But fabric that never changes becomes a shroud. He glanced at the general. You will appoint Kay as instructor to the Ashigaru under a name that offends no clerk. She will train men without spectacle. If anyone asks why their cuts are cleaner and their lives longer, tell them competence is a kind of prayer. Relief and disappointment arrive together. 2 guests who do not speak but understand the other's luggage. I bowed, the floor cool through my kneecaps, and felt my bindings bite. The fox-smiled courtier's mouth thinned. He had not been defeated, only delayed. The general bowed more deeply than required, not to the emperor, but toward the decision itself. When he straightened, he met my eyes. In them, I saw no apology for his sentence in the hall, only a difficult kind of respect, the kind that spends itself and expects spending in return. After the audience, we walked through corridors where murals rehearsed the victories of men. Tominari found me near a window where the city decided which alleys to shade. He stared at my face as if discovering a map in a familiar riverbend. Kai, he said, testing the name like a blade. You are mad. His voice cracked. And correct. Before I could answer, he bowed awkwardly, beautifully, and was gone, swallowed by duty. The general summoned me that evening to a garden of clipped pines and stones that resembled mountains if you squinted at tradition. He stood with his hands behind his back as always. The stance had taught his spine loyalty. You think I betrayed you, he said without turning. You did exactly what you should have, I replied. You brought the truth to a place where it could be weighed. He faced me then. I spoke that sentence. No woman can hold a sword, because the hall needed to hear the weight of the lie before I cut it. It is an old habit of mine, to let a falsehood stand in the open so the wind can find it. He almost smiled. It is not a kind habit. Truth seldom is, I said. The garden lanterns trembled, as if the air were remembering a colder season. He nodded toward the training yard beyond the hedge. You will shape men who do not know what they owe you. They will think you a rumor embodied by their fatigue. Some will hate you without ever naming the reason. Your protection will be the quality of their survival. And you? I asked. It was a question I had no right to. I will stand where I can see the bridge, he said. And I will make sure the river does not rise for sport. He paused. If you require my authority, you will have it. If you require my silence, you will also have it. Use both carefully. When I left him, the moon had climbed the rooftop, and the city was stitching itself into sleep. I touched the place where the helmet had pressed my brow raw, a small coin of pain reminding me of the day's price. I thought of my mother, of my father's whetstone, of the old man under the ginkgo. I thought of a girl moving a broom handle through fog. Steel remembers. So does a woman. Years later, men I trained would tell their sons of a lean instructor whose cuts didn't argue, whose voice made the air neater. They would not mention that she was a woman. They would not need to. The bridges we build well do not carry plaques. They carry footsteps. Sometimes I walk past the palace walls and think of the hall where my name learned its edges. The general still stands like winter, and I still sharpen what can be sharpened. Wrists, breath, resolve. I return home when I can, to the house with quiet eaves where the garden tolerates my mother's grief and my absence. We sit shelling beans, and I place the whetstone on the veranda between us like a small altar. No woman can hold a sword, the general had said, and the hall had frozen to hear it. I have discovered a gentler truth. A sword is only ever held by a decision. Mine was made long ago, in a corridor where a broom handle learned to be steel, where a girl learned to be an answer. When I close my eyes, I feel again the knot at my jaw, the lift of the helmet, the gasp of the room. But what stays with me longest is the cut I did not make, the second stroke the emperor did not ask for. Restraint is another way of saying future. I carry it with me, heavier some days than the blade itself, and I walk the bridge I was allowed to keep building, one patient step at a time.